Okay, so we're going to give up. And we're going to start all over again. So, Akedah is a very difficult story. The banning of Yitzchak is a difficult story, but of course it fits into what we're going through at the moment, which is a very difficult story. And maybe we can kind of draw inspiration from this. So if you look at the beginning of the Akedah, Hashem reaches out to Abraham, and he reaches out with the words, Kach na et bincha. Kach na et bincha, please take your son. And the commentaries, of course, point out that the use of this please is somewhat strange. Was Hashem asking him? So this is what the Talmud in Sanhedrin says. Talmud in Sanhedrin says, it was extremely important to Hashem that Avram withstand this particular test, which was the 10th test of Abraham. There were 10. We're going to go through maybe some of them in the course of this evening. It was very important to Abraham, to Hashem. And he says, please, don't fail this one. Because if you fail this one, then they will say there was no substance to the previous ones. Now, that's a very difficult statement to accept. There is no substance to the previous ones. You know, if you have a test with 10 points and you fail the one question, then you get 90%. So maybe the Akedah is weighted as more than 10%, because it's really a very difficult test and the most difficult test of all. So maybe it's not 90%, but 70 or 80, but whatever it is, the fact that it's actually harder than anything else Avram was asked to do until then means that it doesn't in any way negate that which came before. They were all a test that he passed. Some of them were very difficult as well. This one was the most difficult, and if he had failed it, well, then it may have not shown the complete and full dimension of what Hashem was trying to bring out, but it definitely wouldn't negate everything that had happened before. So we have to understand how that is, how we can justify the words of the Talmud in Sanhedrin. Akedat Yitzchak, this passage of the binding of Yitzchak, is actually kind of a seminal moment, defining moment in our faith, in Jewish history. And because of that, we draw from the merit of this particular act. That's why we have a shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And how many times Akedat Yitzchak is mentioned in our davening daily, and on Rosh Hashanah in particular, it's huge. And there's a custom, if you open your article, Siddur, or many others, that the entire events of the Akedah, of this binding of Yitzchak, are there. And many people read it every single day. Why? Because it is a very important point in our history. And of course, the question is, Abraham wasn't the only one ever to make a sacrifice for God. There are many. Rabbi Akiva famously gave his life for his faith. But I mean, you go through, maybe the Machzor Yom Kippur, where he talks about the 10 martyrs. You talk about the Kinot of Tisha B'Av, and you will find many, many mentions of people who literally gave their lives for Hashem. So why does the Akedah stand out? Yes, he had to not give up his own life, but he was required to give up the life of his child, 37 years old, according to many, many opinions, but still, his son is very difficult. But again, not the only one in history. I'm sorry, but it's very difficult to talk about parents giving up their children at this juncture of our own history as a people. But standing out is Hannah and her 7 sons, which is mentioned in the Medrash, mentioned in the Talmud. In fact, the word she uses is I did 7 Akedas. And she turns to Hashem at the end of this ultimate sacrifice, where 7 of her children have refused to bow down to idol worship. And she says, I have just performed 7 Akedas. So what makes this act of Abraham stand out? Rabbi Yosef Albo, who wrote the book called Ikrim, or Foundations, he says the following. He says, Abraham didn't have to. Abraham didn't have to, and that's what God said, please. And it wasn't forced to. And where do we find that Abraham could have resisted this? So at the end of it all, when Hashem says, don't touch the child, don't hurt the child, Abraham then turns around and says, God, I need to have this out with you. Let me explain to you what I'm going through right now. I mean, initially you said, take your child and bring him up on the altar. And I could have said to you at that point, that makes no sense. This is the future of monotheism. And you want me to throw out everything that I've ever built. And you told me, you will have seed, you will have children through your future. Your nation is going to be built by Yitzchak. And now you're telling me to get rid of him, to sacrifice him, to eliminate him. It doesn't make sense. And now you send an angel to tell me to stop. So Abraham had, and it only comes up then. Abraham said, I could have said to you. It was going through my mind. He could have, he didn't. But if he wanted to rationalize this, he could have turned around to Hashem and said, look, thank you. I understand the request you're making. It makes no sense, and therefore, I cannot fulfill this. And Hashem is saying, nah, please, it doesn't have to, God's please. God's please. Maybe I can share with you a personal anecdote. But I was about 10, maybe, I think 10 or 11. And my family and I were in New York for the summer. And we were very fortunate to merit what's called the Yechidus, or private audience as a family, with the Rebbe. Spent most of the time talking to my father, some of the time talking to my mother, and spent time with each one of us, for a different day, inquiring what about our studies at school, and asking me, my brother was a bit younger, to share some of what we studied. I've done before that particular instance, if he asked my sister as well. And then he turned to my father and he said, Was tun die Kinder ganzen Sommer? What are these kids doing the whole summer? We were really planning to just be as a family, and my parents had rented a little bungalow up in the Catskills, somewhere near Grossinger's. It means anything to anybody here, in Monticello, and there we were, planning to have a summer together. And then the Rebbe said, "Mistama, probably." They'll spend at least a week or two, pointing to my sister, in Camp Emunah, which is a Chabad camp for girls, nearby in the Catskills as well, but definitely not together with the family. And he points to the boys in the Yinglach and the boys in Camp Gan Yisrael, which was in Liberty, New York, also maybe half an hour, 45-minute drive from Monticello, but not where we wanted to be. And that ended when we walked out, and I looked up and I said, that's not going to happen, is it? And my father looked and said, no, the Rebbe told you that you have to go to camp. And I said, the Rebbe said, probably. And my father smiled and said, when the Rebbe says probably, it doesn't mean that you have an option. When God says please, God is telling you what to do. So clearly, most commentaries see this instruction as a command, rather than just a request. So it goes deeper than that. I mean, the please was, I hope you don't fail, because that's going to reflect badly on you. But it wasn't a request. It wasn't instruction. In mysticism, we find that the opening of a channel in the world makes it possible subsequently for people to follow in your footpath. So Abraham's self-sacrifice, willingness to kind of, well, not die himself, but to lose a life in the service of God, what we call mesirat nefesh, or total giving over of the soul. This was something that he was the first one. He was the first one ever. And that opened the channel to make it possible for others to. So even though that concept of mesirat nefesh happened subsequently, and others gave their lives for Hashem, Avraham Avinu was the first one. And that is what makes it so significant. Beginnings are difficult. Once one person has done it, then that can be emulated. In truth, this was number 2 for Avram. Back when he was still called Avram and not Avraham, a younger man, the Torah tells us at the end of the portion of Noach, even before we really start to explore the life of Avram Avinu in Lech Lecha, at the end of Noach, it says that he and his family left Ur Kasdim. That's a place somewhere in Mesopotamia, but the word Ur actually means fire. And there's a story, it's mentioned in the Medrash, it's nowhere in the Torah. It's mentioned in the Medrash, part of oral law, Medrash Rabbah, that explains that Avram was actually thrown into the fire in this place called Kasdim. So Kasdim is the fires, the raging fires of Kasdim. It goes back to a challenge by Nimrod, who said, listen, you're making trouble here. You're going around and saying that there's only one God. Can't be, because there's me also. Nimrod was saying, they were big into worship, but he was saying there's other forces and other powers, and you got to give up this. You got to give up. And eventually Nimrod says to him, look, I worship fire, and I'm going to throw you into the fire. And you God can come and save you. Well, surprise awaited Nimrod, because Avram was thrown into the fire. So he did give up his life previously. Well, attempted to. He didn't. He was miraculously saved, but he displayed that willingness previously. And could we argue that maybe that was even a bigger text? Because at that point, they hadn't given the commandment, even with the pretty please, nothing at all. Nimrod said, stop spreading the belief in monotheism. Avram said, I will not. You can throw him in the fire. But nobody had commanded him to do that, as opposed to the Akedah, where Hashem straight out commanded him or requested it of him. Isn't it greater to do this willingly than when Hashem tells you to? You don't really have a choice. Which leads us to the following question. Would we call Avram Avinu a martyr? What is martyrdom? A martyr is one who is prepared to, or dies, gives up their life for their ideals. And that's not Avram. Avram is beyond that. There is a concept of dying for your beliefs. We all have beliefs that are worth dying for. But sometimes we rationalize that in giving up our life for an ideal, we actually furthering that value and that idea even more, because people then realize the extent to which we had faith in something that we were prepared to even give up, a very, very life for this. And so, we know martyrs. We know many people throughout history, Jewish and non-Jewish, who were prepared to give up their life for that which they believed in. But if you think about it deeper, martyrdom means that their hope that in dying they will achieve and further advance the very ideal that they are, living for and espousing. And Ur Kasdim was such a test, because Abraham was about spreading the belief in one God. And although if he gave up his life, he wouldn't be there, but it could be argued that more would be done for monotheism by people realizing how deeply Abraham meant everything he had preached, to the extent that he was prepared to do and sacrifice himself in that way. That's martyrdom. That's being a martyr. The Akedah is far deeper than that. And at the end of the Akedah, when Hashem says that to an angel, Al tishlach yadcha, don't hurt the child, don't touch the child. He says, Ki ata yadati, ki yirei Elokim ata. Now I know that you are a God-fearing. And that actually, that sentence encapsulates the whole thing. That is, Abraham actually served God through love. He's referred to as Avraham Avi. God says he's Abraham who loved me. And we know that the way of service that Abraham espoused was love. We know it was chesed. We know from the beginning of this week's parasha, in fact, Abraham outside his tent, waiting for guests to come, and frustrated, pained by the fact that nobody is there. Well, Hashem, as a commentary say, made it into a hot day so that there would be no passers-by. And there's Abraham at his tent, his very essence, his kindness is giving his love. The act of the Akedah is completely contrary to his nature, totally. And that's really where we move from martyrdom to total faith in God and obedience. Not only does it go against Avram's own personal nature, but human sacrifice goes against everything that Abraham has preached and pleaded with people for most of his life. It was a common practice of the pagans around it to sacrifice humans to appease the powers that be up there. Abraham said God does not want a human life taken in his service, and he fought against it. Now, Hashem tells him to do the very thing that he always, Abraham's entire faith and relationship with Hashem is based on a lot of reasoning from the very beginning. If you look in Rambam, he gives a beautiful description of development of Abraham's faith. He says it started when he was a young child, and already then there was this kind of root of belief, of faith that grew. He went out there and he said, "There's got to be somebody who's built this beautiful mansion." Medrash again, man's walking into the forest and sees a beautiful mansion in the middle of the forest. He says, "Who built this? There must be some kind of civilization here." So Avram looks at the world and he comes to the realization there's got to be a high force, and this leads him to the recognition of God and ultimately to the teaching, the preaching of monotheism all around him. And that just doesn't make sense. This does not make sense at all. Everything that he's worked for always is going to be destroyed. Hashem told him his future is in that child, Yitzchak. That's going to be his successor. And now he's going to throw all that out. And where's it all going to go? So logically, nothing here makes sense. Plus, he's going to benefit very little because nobody's there. Okay, the Akedah happens with only three entities present. Abraham went with Yitzchak. It also says he took with him Shnei Na'arav, his two lads, and they're probably also quite advanced in years, but one was Eliezer, His servant Elon was Yishmael, his older son. But then at the end, he says to them, please remain here at the bottom of the mountain. I'm going up with Yitzchak alone. What happened was that both Yitzchak and Abraham sensed the presence of the Shekhinah because there was a cloud around, like probably something like what happens around what they call it, Lion's Head, where you get that cloud wrapping around, and turned to the two other young men and said, do you see what I see? And they had no idea. So he thought, well, obviously they're not experiencing the Shekhinah, they're staying down below. And just the two of them with Hashem on top of the mountain. So whatever happened there would have remained on Mount Moriah and never would. So if Avram was hoping to achieve any publicity from this, there wasn't going to be any. The paparazzi weren't there. This was not going to advance Avram's agenda in any way. This is the proof that Avram is acting out of complete mesirut nefesh, or giving over of the soul. That he's setting aside everything he stands for. That he's setting aside all reason and doing something which makes no sense to him and to anybody else who cannot rationalize it. And I started the shiur by saying that the Akedah makes no sense. That's correct. It makes no sense. That's the true measure of his relationship with Hashem. God says, now I know how you serve me out of real respect, fear, yirah. And if you had failed this, that's why I said to you, please don't fail this one, because this sheds a totally different light on everything that Avraham Avinu has done until now, the first 9 tests, including the one at Ur Kasdim, which, as we discussed a few minutes ago, can be put away to can be explained by rationalization. Now it shows that Abraham, in all 9 previous tests, was acting out of complete faith and with no personal agendas or rationale at all. And that's what God was saying, please, because this test is going to prove without any doubt the depth of our mutual relationship. This test is going to prove without any doubt that the previous 9 tests were also at a level altogether different from this. Now I know. We're in a difficult time. We're in a very difficult time. And we start by saying we don't understand. This is not one Akedah, and this is not like Hannah said, 7 Akedas, but this is hundreds and hundreds of Akedas, some alive in horrific conditions and others, unfortunately, who are never going to come back. We're trying to understand. The Pasha tells us that there's stuff we'll never understand. We mustn't try. And that's the test. That's the test of faith we're going through now. So besides everything else that we're going to be doing, davening and Tehillim, and I should have mentioned it earlier, but the Torah learning, and made this shiur be dedicated to freedom for the captives and healing for those who are ill, and healing for those who are bereft and mourning and in doubt and wondering where their children are or where their parents are. We do all that. We also take a certain level of acceptance that there are questions that cannot be answered. Sorry to be leaving on this note, but that's where we are, unfortunately. A very good evening. Please God, be back next week.
Thank you.